likes to make people laugh in any way possible, even at the expense of his auntie. But he'll be getting that later. Are we ready, Stu? Are we okay? Brilliant. Okay. So this morning we are going to be talking, continuing our series about the rhythms of grace. And this morning is all about being a whole life disciple. And looking at what it means to live our lives, just our ordinary, everyday lives, with Jesus. And I've got a little bit of a demonstration for us all. So yeah, it's all homemade, so it's not very fancy. But I think what some people think, and what we can be guilty of thinking, is that life can fall into two separate categories. That life can fall into a spiritual category, and I couldn't think of a better word, so I just put not spiritual category, just because it's the opposite of being spiritual. That is what I've decided to call it. And when we think about the spiritual things in life, we're thinking about those things that are pleasing to God, things that we would call religious, pious, things that don't make sense if God is not at the center of them. And then when we think about the not spiritual things in life, we're thinking about the things not necessarily that are sinful or displeasing to God, things that we might call like worldly or secular, or like just everyday things that all people do, whether you're a Christian or not. And we kind of categorize our life. So I've just come up with some like ideas of what we might categorize. So the first is church. Sunday morning, that is set apart for Jesus in the spiritual box. But then Monday morning we get up and go to work, and we might think, well, that's not very spiritual, so I'll put that in there. Sleep. We might think that just having a normal everyday sleep is not very spiritual, but getting up early in the morning and having some prayer time, oh my gosh, extra Jesus points for you. That goes in the spiritual box. Here's a good one, parenting. We might just think that is something that we just have to do and is not very spiritual. Sometimes, definitely in my house, it's not spiritual at all. Entertainment. That's not very spiritual. Put that in that box. But turn up to a Thursday night Bible study and you're winning. You get put in the spiritual box. Money. We don't think money is very spiritual. And then I've got some comparisons. I think sometimes we think that one thing is spiritual and one thing isn't. So I've got joy and sadness. I think sometimes if we're feeling really joyful, oh my gosh, we're doing well. We're so spiritual. But if we're feeling a bit rubbish and life is not going well, we mustn't be very spiritual then. We mustn't be close to God if we feel sad. Another one. This is one Jesus got all the time, didn't he? Fasting and food. I don't think we think food is very spiritual, so we put it in the not spiritual. But if you're fasting and you're giving up food for God, oh my gosh, bonus points for you in the Jesus box. Here's one that we don't do really well on Restoration Church Sunday morning, noise and quiet. Yeah, we do. But we think that because it's noisy, it's not very spiritual. That the kids running around and being noisy and crazy means that we can't be spiritual. We put that in the not spiritual box, but we put quiet and peace. Oh yes, now we're winning. Now we're close to Jesus if we're quiet. Here's another one that I know. I'll tell you a little story of that I'm very guilty of. Leaders, I'm talking like church leaders, Bible study leaders, worship leaders, and everyone else. We think that the leaders are the spiritual ones and that everybody else in the congregation is not. I know when I was, I think it was when Judah was a baby, he was born when Joe was working at the Message for the prisons team. And he was going into the prisons and he was preaching about Jesus and he was leading church services and leading Bible studies and alpha courses and doing all these amazing, very spiritual things. And he would come home from work and he would tell all these stories of things that happened, and he saw some amazing things happen. He saw prisoners change their lives completely. He saw hundreds of guys give their lives to Jesus. He saw miracles, people healed. He saw like loads of crazy stuff happen, didn't you? And he would come home and he would tell these stories. And I'm sat at home with a newborn baby and 2 older children. And you know, it would be like, how's your day? Oh my gosh, this happened and this happened and this happened. And then he was like, how's your day? Well, I changed 16 nappies and I picked up some toys and I think I probably ate somewhere in that. But my day was so uneventful compared to what he was doing. And then worst of all, is like churches are so guilty of this. He would get up on a Sunday morning and they'd be like, tell us what happened this week, Joe. And he would share all the church, and they would all cheer and get very excited, which is totally right? We should get excited when people come to faith. But I was sat there in the congregation thinking, well, the only thing I've done is change dirty nappers and feed a child and kept it alive for this week. And I was so guilty of thinking that because Joe was leading and doing amazing things for God, that he was super spiritual, and because I was at home with a baby, that I was not. And I sometimes struggled with that. It was a struggle. Got some other things. A couple of weeks ago, Spring Harvest. Although it's a holiday, we get to go to church services and worship, so we're putting that in the spiritual box. But our hobbies, no, that's not very spiritual, whether it's gaming or golf or football or whatever you're into. We don't think of those things as spiritual. Education, I'm going to put that in the non-spiritual box. Sex, I'm going to put that in the non-spiritual box. But mission, going on mission and doing things for Jesus, oh my goodness me, you are brownie points for Jesus. Here's another comparison for you. Worship music and music. Worship music, oh, we're so spiritual if we listen to worship music, but we listen to non-worship music, that goes in the non-spiritual box. Serving, we've just talked about it. Stu just said if you can come at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, you might think you turn up at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, oh my gosh, you've got up early out of bed, you're so spiritual. And then here's the last one that we're going to talk about today. Body and spirit. We think that our spirits are the spiritual things and that our body is not. But let me tell you, I've got a third box. Because when we think about these, I think I'm so guilty of doing this sometimes, and sometimes it's consciously. I've had to change the way I think about something. But sometimes it's been an unconscious thing that I've not actually recognised that I'm feeling and acknowledging in myself. When we look at the Bible and see what Jesus teaches about this, there's none of this separation. There's just whole life living. And the Bible just puts it all in one. It's all together. There's no separation of spiritual and not spiritual things. There's just one life that we get to live, and we get to do it all for the glory of God. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning. How do we do that? How do we take all that stuff that we've put in there and live it in honor and glory to God? When we separate stuff, it creates like this divided life, this disjointed living. Like we show up, it's like putting different hats on. We go to work and we put our work hat on and we send the emails and we have the meetings and we talk the very proper talk. And then we come home and put the home hat on and we parent the kids and we cook the meals and we do the washing and the cleaning and the ironing and we do the DIY and we manage our budget and we just get that stuff done because it has to be done. And then we get up on Sunday morning and whoop, put our church hat on. Now we're so spiritual because we come into church and that's a different part of us. So we put our church face on and we get ready to be very spiritual. But it's just not what the Bible teaches. We don't see that separation. What we see is a whole life surrendered. Just want to look at Genesis 2 verse 7. This is talking about when God creates Adam. He says, "Then the Lord formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." I want to think about the order that God does this in. Because God forms the body out of the dust first, then breathes life into it, and Adam becomes a living being. Now that word living being means like an animated, breathing, conscious living being, like a full person, not just a body that's alive. And God didn't go, okay, I'm going to create Adam's spirit, and Adam is going to be a person, and then I'm going to send Adam as this person to live in a body like a rented car or something that we borrow for a certain amount of time and then we leave behind as we pass on. The real substance of who we are is our spirit. The Bible doesn't give us that impression. The Bible says God comes, breathes life into Adam, and he becomes this full person, this living being in all totality. That fullness of who he is contained within a body. Body, spirit, soul, all contained in one person, whole, and not parts, not separated, but complete as one together. C.S. Lewis has this great quote. So C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, I love this quote. "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. It's immortals who we joke with, work with, marry, snub and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors." And this does not mean that we are to be perpetually solemn. We must play, but our merriment must be of that kind, and it is in fact the merriest kind, which exists between people who have, from the outset, taken each other seriously. No flippancy, no superiority, no presumption. I love that this idea that, first of all, we recognize that who people are. Each one of us in this room is created in the image of God. And from that, we take that idea seriously, and then that leads to us enjoying that person because we understand who they are and who they were created to be. We take each other seriously, and then we enjoy them. God honors our bodies, our physical bodies. How do we know that? What idea gives us that? It's the incarnation. It's Jesus deciding to leave heaven and come to earth and live in a body. Jesus, this is revolutionary, you guys. Jesus was a human. Ta-ta-ta. Jesus got hungry, and so he ate and he drank. He got tired and he slept. He walked for miles and he would have been dirty and sweaty and smelly and needed a bath. Jesus used a toilet. God of the universe used, well, they wouldn't have had toilets, would they? I don't know what they would have used back in Jesus. I didn't do my full research, but it would have gone to the toilet. It would have had aches and pains and body stuff going on. He was fully human in all his humanness. And he so enjoyed being a human that the Pharisees called him like a glutton and a drunk, because he really just enjoyed hanging out with his mates and having a nice long meal. And he did it so often that people were like, "Oh, you're just a drunkard. You're just a glutton. You're always eating. You're always having a meal." He enjoyed life. I love watching the Chosen series because you can see the enjoyment that Jesus gets from life, the enjoyment of being with his disciples, the enjoyment of hanging out with his mates, the enjoyment of a good meal and the laughter, the enjoyment of children. There's a scene where he like interacts with these children and he's just laughing and joking, and it's just a really beautiful picture of God as a human being coming and living as one of us. And because he did that, because he came, that gives our lives dignity. It gives our bodies dignity because Jesus himself, God in flesh, came and lived as one of us. And we do the same things that Jesus do. We eat and we drink and we sleep when we're tired. Jesus followed those same rhythms. And it shows that our bodies are important because Jesus came in a very human body. So what do we do with that? If we know that Jesus came and we know that our bodies are important and we know that it's important to live a whole-centered life, how do we do that? Well, if we look at Romans 12, this is the Message version, which is brilliant. This is what it tells us about living a whole life disciple. So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you. Develops well-formed maturity in you. You might know these verses better in the NIV version, which says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So we can understand like the theology, like the reason why behind. We understand why our lives are important, why our bodies are important. We were created by God, and we can have that understanding. We were created in the image of God. We can understand that mentally, but we might not understand how we live life with that. What do we do with that? What do we do with that understanding, that knowing that we were created by God? Does that mean we live like a monk and separate ourselves and just be like, oh, now I know this information, I will never go near any other person or touch anything that's dirty or live a life that's completely separate? Or does God have a different way for us? What does it mean to live it out in our bodies, live our faith out? When I was preparing for this talk, I've read a book by a lady called Tish Harrison Warren. Gosh, she's got a long name. Tish Harrison Warren. Oh my gosh, still can't get it right. It's called Liturgy of the Ordinary, and it talks about our life as ordinary people and how that works. And I'm not putting the quote up yet, no. Sorry. But she talks about living life through our bodies. So that when we lift our hands in worship, when we kneel down to pray, when we sing songs, when we use our mouths to recite the Bible, when we close our eyes or lift our eyes to heaven, we are physically doing something with our bodies that orientates us towards God. We are moving our bodies in such a way that we're saying, my focus, my attention right now is going to be on God. Tony will know well that when you're boxing, you learn all these moves, like the right hook and the uppercut and the jab and stuff like that. And when Joe, what? Other hand, okay. That one. I don't know which hand I did. I'm not a boxer, as you might tell. When Joe started boxing with Tony, he was like, it's so complicated. Because Tony's like shouting out like, jab, jab, cut, and he's like, my brain can't keep up with it. But as you do it more and more, as you practice, what your body does is it builds up this muscle memory so that when Tony shouts his cues, you instantly go with the right move. And the more you practice, the better you become, the quicker you become, the more easy it becomes. And that's what it is like for us, living our faith through our bodies, that as we lift our hands in worship, as we kneel in prayer, as we do those physical things with our body, we are building muscle memory. And that, we're one whole being, right? We're all connected, so that when our body moves, our spirit does it as well. Sometimes this is really helpful when life is really tough. When you have those moments where you just feel totally overwhelmed and feel like you can't go on and something is really, really overwhelming you, and you feel like you don't have the words to pray, or you feel like you show up on a Sunday and you can't actually sing the songs. Sometimes when you just kneel down before God, or when you just close your eyes, or when you just lift your hands, your body does what your emotions can't. Your body responds to God in a way that you feel you can't. And I see this with my kids at home. Sometimes we'll be just getting about normal day-to-day life at home, and I'll hear the kids singing worship songs, the songs from church. And they'll just be playing with their toys or on their tablets or doing whatever, but they'll be singing because they've come to church, their bodies have practiced this muscle memory of learning these songs, and they might not even understand what the words mean yet, but they are learning to orientate themselves towards God. They are learning that posture of singing and worship. And one day, our hope and prayers as parents is that they will understand the words as well. And when they do, their bodies will go, oh yeah, I remember this. I remember this. This is something I've been practicing since I was a little kid. My body is used to orientating itself towards God. And now I understand it with my brain as well. If we don't live our lives as whole life disciples, what we might find is that we fall into the habit of listening to what culture says about our bodies, about our lives. Because the world says that there's this one idea that our bodies are just meant for pleasure, just meant for good things. And we just, when our body craves something, when we want food or when we want chocolate or whatever it is, just to give in to that. Because why not? Your body's just there for pleasure. It's something to be worshipped and revered. And those that we look up to as people with perfect bodies, we idolize and say, those guys are amazing. And I am not, if we're not that way. And then the other thing that people do is think that bodies are something to be conquered, to master, something that to be dominated, that we're always constantly in this fight against our human flesh and our bodies, and it's always something that we have to overcome and bring into submission Like we have to discipline our bodies, and the bodies, it's not a good thing, and we have to live a life of penitence. And that's what Tish Harrison Warren, I got it right this time, says in her book. Yeah, the quote now. If the church does not teach us what our bodies are for, our culture certainly will. If we don't learn to live the Christian life as embodied beings, worshipping God and stewarding the good gift of our bodies, we will learn a false gospel, an alternative liturgy of the body. Instead of temples of the Holy Spirit, we will come to see our bodies primarily as a tool for meeting our needs and desires. Or we might believe that our bodies should be flawless and spend endless amounts of time and money on creams or Botox or surgery to stave off the reality of our frail and aging bodies. Or we may attempt to ignore embodiment altogether, eating and drinking what we will with no regard for the way our choices violate a call to steward our bodies as gifts. If God created our bodies and he allowed us to live in them whilst we are on this earth, and we are a whole person living in our body, then what we do with it matters, because you can't separate it. So when you go to work, your body goes to work, you physically transport it in a car to work, or if you stew, you transport it upstairs to another room in the house. You physically transport it to work, but your spirit and your soul and your whole body goes and does it as well. If you engage in sin, you take your body with you, and your soul and your spirit. Your whole being goes and engages in that sin. We cannot be separated. You can't say, okay, my body is going to go do this, but it'll still be good because I'll still go to church on Sunday and be spiritual, and it'll be fine with Jesus. It goes together. It cannot be separated. We have a responsibility to honour the body that God has given us and look after it. We are stewards of the good gifts that God has given us. As parents, we steward our kids, we raise them up, we want them to become decent human beings, and we spend years building on that. We steward that good gift that God has given us. Us leaders at the church, we are stewarding this church because we recognise that this is God's church that he has given to us to look after. And so we show up at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning and get stuff ready for people, and we put in the time and effort to make sure things get done, and we buy the coffee and the donuts and the cakes and stuff like that because we want to steward what God has given us well. And why should it be any different with our bodies? We should look after that which God has given us. I watched, and I forced Joel to watch it with me, this documentary on Netflix recently, which is a really good watch. I definitely recommend it. And it's called something about 100 years of Live to 100. And it looks at, there are certain places in the world, and they've coined them blue zones. And there's this idea that there are pockets of the world where there are an unusually high percentage of people that live to 100. So this guy, I can't remember his name, has gone on a bit of an investigation into why. Why do certain areas of the world have all these people that live to 100? What is their secret to living? Because people spend hundreds and thousands of pounds wanting to live longer. And so he was like, well, what is it that these guys have got that we're all missing? And it was amazing. It's fascinating. So there's a few different places that he goes to. One of them is a Greek island. One of them is Sardinia in Italy. Another one is in a part of Japan. There's Costa Rica, part in Costa Rica. One of the ones that was really fascinating to me was a place in America that has a large Seventh-day Adventist community, so the Christian community. And these Seventh-day Adventists have their Sabbath, and they're very religious about their Sabbath. Every Saturday, they observe the Sabbath religiously. And yet they are seeing that this community of Christians in America have such long lives that it got the national, global attention of these people. And it's amazing when you look at the common reasons between all these places that they're actually biblical principles. Things like community. Living in a community where you look after each other was like a massive thing. One of them was rest. So the Seventh-day Adventists, their rest looked like a day's Sabbath. But the others had this rhythm of life where they would work hard and then rest hard. One of them was the diet and the food that they ate. It was mostly like non-processed, healthy food. A diet rich in fruit and vegetables and healthy fats and things like that. But it wasn't just about diet. It was this whole life living. And what I just found the documentary fascinating because it wasn't made by a Christian and he had no idea, but he listed as one of the things that if you want to live to 100, one of the things that you should have is some kind of faith. And he didn't say Christian faith, but he said faith. The idea that I took from that was that if I live my life following what Jesus says about my life, it is going to go well for me. God cares not just about our spiritual health, but our physical health and our emotional health, our whole being as one. And it is our responsibility to steward what he has done well. Now, this is not an advert for a vegan diet or anything like that, or, I'm not saying you should do this, this, and this to be healthy. What I'm saying is ask the question of yourself. Am I looking after myself in the way that God would have me? Am I stewarding this gift that God has given me, this body that I am living in on this earth? Am I stewarding it well? Am I looking after it? Am I doing what God has asked me? Okay, we are just going to go into some questions. So we're going to go, we're not going to spend too much time looking at these questions, but if we can break off into groups and just spend 5 to 10 minutes just going over the questions, and then we'll finish. I'll come up and finish.